She was just a small, lonely girl in the woods. But what she did for a wounded child that one evening brought 30 armed riders to her door at dawn and changed two worlds forever. The wind moved gently through the tall pine trees as the last light of evening faded over the hills. 8-year-old Eliza Brooks stood near her small wooden cabin, her arms full of firewood. The forest around her was quiet, except for the sound of the river flowing nearby. It was a sound she had grown used to since her grandmother passed away. Eliza lived alone now. The little cabin on the edge of the forest had once felt warm, full of stories and soup and soft blankets. But now it felt quiet and cold, especially when the sun went down. Still, she tried her best every day. She gathered wood, picked berries, and kept the fire going. She had no one else. Just as she turned to go back inside, a sound broke through the stillness, sharp, soft, and filled with fear. It was not an animal. It was a cry, a human cry. Eliza froze. Her eyes turned toward the river, where the mist was rising in the cool air. She heard it again, a whimper, then silence. Her heart pounded in her chest. She dropped the firewood and ran toward the sound, her feet crunching over leaves and roots. As she reached the riverbank, she saw her. A girl, small, muddy, and struggling, was in the middle of the river. The water reached her waist and pushed hard against her, making her stumble again and again. Her long black hair clung to her face. Her eyes were wide with panic. One leg did not move right. Eliza could see it was twisted. The girl tried to step forward but slipped, falling into the cold water with a cry. Eliza looked left and right. No one else was coming. No one would help. Most children might have run for an adult, but Eliza had no adult to run to, and something deep inside her would not let her turn away. She stepped into the river without thinking. The cold hit her like knives, biting through her thin dress. The current pulled at her legs, but she moved forward one step at a time. Rocks slipped beneath her feet. She fell once, catching herself on her hands. But she kept going. When she reached the girl, she grabbed her hand. The girl's skin was cold, and her lips were blue. She said something Eliza could not understand, soft, shaking words in another language. Eliza just nodded and held on tighter. Together, they moved slowly back toward the shore. It took all of Eliza's strength to pull the girl up the muddy bank. By the time they reached the grass, both girls were soaked, shivering, and breathless. Eliza looked at the girl. The girl looked back at her. No words were needed. In that moment, something passed between them. Fear, trust, and a question neither one could speak. Eliza stood up and reached for the girl's hand again. "Come," she whispered. "I will help you." Eliza pushed open the heavy wooden door of her cabin with her shoulder. The girl leaned against her, wet and shaking, barely able to stand. Her injured leg dragged behind her, and each step brought a soft sound of pain from her lips. Eliza was small, but she used every bit of strength she had to help the girl inside. The cabin was dark except for the soft glow of embers in the fireplace. Eliza hurried to light a small oil lamp, filling the room with a gentle light. The girl looked around, her wide eyes full of fear and confusion. She backed into a corner, still dripping with river water, and hugged her arms to her chest. Eliza moved slowly, carefully. She knelt beside the fire and added dry wood. The flames came to life with a soft crackle. Then she turned and pointed to the fire. "Warm," she said softly. The girl did not answer. She looked afraid, not just cold or hurt, but deeply afraid, as if she did not know if this place was safe. Eliza took one of the dry blankets from the shelf and held it out. The girl hesitated. Then, with slow, careful steps, she limped forward and took the blanket. She sat near the fire, wrapping it around her shoulders, her eyes never leaving Eliza. Eliza sat across from her, watching quietly. Her grandmother had once told her, "If someone is frightened, do not rush them. Let kindness speak first." Eliza stood and went to the small cupboard. She pulled out a wooden box that held the few medical supplies her grandmother had left behind: cloth strips, dried herbs, a jar of honey, and a bottle of strong-smelling liquid. She returned to the girl and pointed to her leg. "Can I look?" she asked. The girl did not speak, but after a long moment, she nodded once. Eliza gently unwrapped the wet cloth from around the leg. It was swollen and bruised, and the skin had small cuts from the rocks in the river. The ankle was bent in a way that made Eliza wince. She had seen something like this once, when her grandmother had treated a broken bone. "I will help," Eliza said softly. She showed the girl the herbs and the splint she was making from 2 pieces of wood and some cloth. The girl watched with wide eyes, but did not stop her. She bit her lip hard as Eliza wrapped the leg tightly and tied it in place. Tears slid down her cheeks, but she did not cry out. When the bandage was done, Eliza handed her a tin cup of warm water. The girl drank slowly, then whispered something, a single word. "Mira." Eliza pointed to herself. "Eliza." The girl gave the smallest smile, and in that moment, the silence between them no longer felt heavy. It felt gentle, like the start of something new. The fire crackled softly, sending warm light across the cabin walls. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like a whisper. Inside, the 2 girls sat wrapped in blankets, their clothes drying near the hearth. Eliza watched Mira closely. The other girl had stopped shivering, though her face still looked pale and tired. She held the warm cup close to her lips, breathing in the steam but not drinking much. Her eyes darted around the room, curious but still cautious. Eliza wanted to say something, but she was not sure what. Mira did not understand her words, and Eliza did not know any of Myra's language. So instead, Eliza did what her grandmother used to do when words were too heavy. She began to make food. From a small tin box, she took out some dried cornmeal and a handful of dried berries. She added water and stirred them over the fire in a black iron pot. The smell filled the cabin slowly, warm and sweet. Myra's eyes followed every movement. When Eliza offered her a wooden bowl filled with the simple meal, Mira hesitated for a moment, then took it with both hands. She brought it to her mouth and ate slowly, carefully. After a few bites, she looked at Eliza and smiled. Not just with her lips, but with her whole face. It was small, quiet, but it was real. They ate in silence for a while. Then Eliza stood and pulled out a piece of old charcoal from the edge of the fire. She grabbed a scrap of cloth and began to draw on the wooden floor. A picture of the river and 2 small stick figures, one pulling the other from the water. Mira watched, eyes wide with interest. Then she reached for the charcoal. She drew a small mountain, and beside it, a bird with wide wings. Eliza pointed at it. "Bird," she asked. Mira said something softly, a word that sounded like Kina. Eliza repeated it carefully. "Kina." Mira nodded. Then Eliza drew a small house and pointed to herself. "Home." Myra's eyes darkened for a moment. She took the charcoal and drew a larger group of stick people, then put an X through it. She looked down. Eliza did not speak. She only reached out slowly and touched Myra's hand gently. Mira looked up. Their hands stayed there, resting together, small and unsure, but not alone. Later, Eliza brought out an old quilt and laid it near the fire. Mira lay down carefully, wincing as she moved her injured leg. Eliza covered her gently, the way her grandmother used to do. As the firelight danced across the walls, Eliza sat beside her and listened to the sounds of night returning outside. The wind, the river, the soft creaks of old wood. For the first time in many months, she did not feel quite so lonely. The sky was still dark when Eliza opened her eyes. At first, she did not know what had woken her. The fire had burned low, and the cabin was quiet, except for Myra's soft breathing from under the quilt. Eliza sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes. Then she heard it again, not a sound from inside, but from far off. A deep, steady rhythm. Faint, but growing louder. Hoofbeats. Eliza froze. She crawled to the window, careful not to make a sound. Her fingers reached for the edge of the wooden shutter, and she slowly pushed it open just a crack. Fog lay thick across the ground, rolling like smoke through the trees. But through it, Eliza could see shadows, dark shapes on horseback. 1, 2, no more. At least a dozen. No, even more than that. The sound of horses grew louder, like thunder in the earth. Riders moved through the fog, quiet but purposeful. They did not speak, but their formation was clear. They were surrounding the cabin. Eliza's heart pounded in her chest. Her breath caught. She ducked back from the window and crawled to Mira, who still lay sleeping. She gently touched her shoulder. "Mira," she whispered. "Wake up. Someone is here." Mira stirred, blinking slowly. Eliza pointed to the window. "Riders. Many of them." Mira sat up fast, her face pale. She listened, and then her eyes widened. She pushed off the blanket, sat up straight, and looked toward the door. Then she spoke, not to Eliza, but into the silence. It was her language, quick and sharp, full of breath and worry. Her hands moved as she spoke, pointing to the sounds outside. Her face changed, fear, yes, but also something else. Recognition. Eliza's voice was soft. "You know them, don't you?" Mira looked at her and gave a small nod. Then she said a word that sounded important, full of meaning, and placed her hand over her chest. Her eyes filled with tears. Eliza did not understand the word, but she understood the feeling. Mira knew these riders. They were her people. Still, the fear in Myra's face did not go away. She tried to stand, but her leg gave out beneath her. Eliza helped her sit again near the fire. They both looked at the door. A shadow passed across the window. Someone was standing just outside. Eliza's whole body trembled. She had never been this afraid. These were warriors, powerful, serious, silent. They carried weapons, and they were here because of Mira. Eliza did not know if they came in peace. She only knew that they had found them. She reached for Myra's hand. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The knock came like thunder. 3 hard raps shook the wooden door. Not angry, not wild, but strong and sure. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. She looked at Mira, whose eyes were wide, filled with both hope and fear. Mira tried to rise again, but her injured leg made her wince. She placed her hand over her heart and spoke a word, soft, full of feeling, then pointed to the door. Eliza stood slowly. Her legs felt like tree branches in the wind. She stepped toward the door with shaking hands. She touched the wooden latch, took one deep breath, and opened it. A man stood there, tall and still. He filled the doorway with his presence. His skin was marked with paint in deep reds and black. His long dark hair was braided with beads and feathers. His eyes, sharp and steady, watched Eliza with the calm focus of a hawk. His face showed no emotion, only strength. Behind him, more warriors sat on their horses. Their faces were unreadable, but their hands rested close to their weapons. The fog swirled around them like ghosts. Eliza stepped back. The tall man's gaze moved past her. When he saw Mira lying by the fire, he breathed out something that sounded like her name. His shoulders softened just a little. He stepped inside. At once, voices rose behind him. 2 warriors followed, their faces dark with worry and anger. One pointed to Myra's leg, then at Eliza, shouting words she did not understand. Another touched the bandages on Myra's leg and scowled. Eliza's chest tightened. They thought she had hurt her. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Then Mira shouted something, loud, clear, and full of fire. Everyone stopped. She pointed to Eliza, then to her own leg. Her voice trembled, but her words were strong. Her hands moved as she spoke, showing shapes, pointing to the floor, the fire, the blanket, the water. The tall man watched her without blinking. When she finished, she leaned back against the wall, out of breath. Silence filled the room. Then the man looked at Eliza again. His eyes studied every detail, her dirty hands, the herbs on the table, the cloth stained with Myra's blood, the shared meal near the fire. He stepped closer. Eliza stood still, heart pounding. The man looked into her eyes for a long time. Then, slowly, he nodded. He turned to the other warriors and spoke firmly. The anger in their faces faded. Their shoulders lowered. One even looked down at the floor, ashamed. Mira smiled, tired but proud. The tall man stepped back toward the door. Before he left, he looked at Eliza one more time and gave a small, respectful bow of his head. Eliza did not know his name, but she knew what she had seen in his eyes. A test, and maybe the beginning of trust. The cabin had grown quiet again. The warriors stepped back outside, waiting in a circle around the house. Only the tall man, the one with the hawk eyes, remained inside. He stood by the fire, his gaze on Mira. She spoke softly now, her voice steady. Though Eliza could not understand the words, she knew Mira was telling the whole story about the river, the rescue, the bandages, and the warmth of the fire. She pointed again and again to Eliza, touching her heart each time. The tall man listened without a word. His hands were still, his eyes full of thought. Then he turned to Eliza. Slowly, he knelt before her. Eliza's breath caught in her chest. She had never seen a grown man kneel, not like this. His head bowed slightly. His presence, so strong a moment ago, now felt gentle. The firelight flickered across the beads in his hair and the lines on his face. From the pouch at his side, he pulled something wrapped in soft leather. He opened it with care and held out a pendant. It was shaped from a dark, polished stone, carved with symbols that looked ancient. It hung from a cord of braided horsehair. Eliza stared at it, wide-eyed. The man spoke slowly, each word careful. "This for you." She looked at him, confused. He touched his chest. "My blood. My father. His father. Many before." Then he pointed to Mira. "Daughter." He touched Eliza's shoulder. "Now sister." Myra's eyes filled with tears. She nodded and reached out her hand toward Eliza. Eliza looked down at the pendant again. Her fingers trembled as she touched it. It felt smooth and warm, as if it had been waiting for her. The man continued. "You save her. You care. No family." He looked around the cabin, the empty shelves, the quiet space. "Now family." Eliza could not speak. Her throat felt tight. Her eyes stung. She had not heard that word, family, in so long. Not since her grandmother's voice had faded from the earth. Not since the world had become quiet. He placed the pendant around her neck. It rested against her chest, solid and strong. Then he rose to his full height again and said, "You come with us. Learn our ways." "She learn yours." Both daughters now. Eliza stared at him, trying to take in the meaning of his words. He was not asking her to visit. He was offering her something she had lost, belonging. She looked at Mira, who nodded gently, eyes full of hope. Then she looked down at the pendant resting on her chest. It was more than a gift. It was a promise. The fire had burned low again. Eliza sat on the edge of her small wooden bed, the sacred pendant resting against her chest. Mira lay nearby, resting, her legs still wrapped tightly. The room was quiet, but Eliza's thoughts were loud. She looked around the cabin. This place had been her whole world. Every crack in the wall, every creak in the floor held memories. Her grandmother's chair still sat in the corner. The old books were stacked neatly by the window. Her tiny carved doll lay on the shelf, just where it always had. Could she really leave it all behind? The door opened softly. Torrin stepped inside. He stood for a moment in silence, watching her. Then he spoke, not in anger, but in warning. "Soldiers come," he said. Eliza turned toward him, her eyes wide. "How do you know?" One of the warriors entered behind him and spoke quickly in their language. Torrin listened, then looked back at her. "They follow tracks. Myra's trail leads here. They close. Maybe hours. Maybe less." Eliza's heart beat faster. She had heard of the soldiers, men in blue coats who rode hard and asked few questions. The townspeople spoke of them with fear. If they found Mira here, what would they do? Torrin's voice was low. "If they find you with her, they think you help enemy." "I'm just a girl," Eliza whispered. Torrin shook his head. "They do not care. They see native girl and white child's home. They see danger, not kindness." Eliza's throat tightened. "But this is my home." Torrin's eyes softened. "Yes, home, but alone. Winter is near. No food, no safety, no one to help." He stepped forward and gently touched the quilt beside her. "You carry grandmother's spirit," he said. "We respect that, but spirit also wants you safe." Eliza looked down at her hands. They were small and rough from work. She had kept herself alive, but just barely. Behind her, Mira stirred and sat up slowly. She reached for Eliza's hand and held it tight. Then she said 2 words, soft and careful. "Come. Safe." Eliza did not answer. Her mind pulled in 2 directions. The cabin was all she had left of the life she once knew. But staying here now might bring danger, even death. She looked at Torrin again. "I am afraid," she whispered. He nodded. So was Mira, but she crossed the river. Outside, the wind had changed. It carried the cold bite of early snow. The fire flickered weakly. Torin turned to go. We leave soon. You choose. Eliza stood and walked to the window. In the distance, the hills were still covered in morning fog. But beneath the mist, something was moving. Shadows on horseback. They were coming. She touched the pendant on her chest and felt its warmth. Her world was changing, and she had to decide if she would change with it. Eliza had never ridden a horse before. Her legs shook as Torin lifted her onto the back of a calm, dark mare. Mira was helped up behind her, arms wrapped gently around Eliza's waist. The saddle was worn but soft. The horse stood steady beneath them, waiting for the signal to move. Torin looked up at them and nodded. Hold tight, he said. Then the signal came, a quiet word from one of the scouts, and the tribe began to ride. They moved in silence through the trees, like wind passing through leaves. The warriors spread out ahead and behind them, keeping watch. No one spoke loudly. The forest listened. Eliza looked around as they rode. She had walked these woods before, but only at the edges. Now she saw paths she never knew were there. Deer trails, hidden streams, and narrow mountain passes wrapped in mist. Mira leaned forward and pointed to a tall tree. Nest, she said. Eliza followed her finger. High in the branches, a great bird sat in a woven nest of sticks. Its wings spread wide as it took flight. Eagle, Mira said, smiling. Eliza repeated the word, softly. Eagle. Mira nodded. Strong bird. Our guide. They crossed a shallow creek where fish darted underfoot. They climbed a ridge where the trees stood so close together that sunlight barely reached the ground. Once, a family of deer stepped into their path and watched them pass without fear. Time felt different in the forest. Eliza did not speak much. She listened. She felt. With each mile, the cabin felt farther away, not just in distance but in memory. After many hours, the group stopped at the top of a rise. The sun had begun to fall behind the hills. Torin rode ahead, then raised his arm. Below them, nestled between two ridge lines, lay a wide valley. Eliza gasped. A river ran through the center, clear and blue, its banks covered in grass and wildflowers. Smoke rose gently from cooking fires. Tents and wooden shelters stood in small clusters. Children ran near the water. Women worked with beads and leather. Men tended to strong horses. Life was everywhere, not loud, but steady, rooted, full of rhythm and care. Home, Mira whispered behind her. Eliza looked at it all with wide eyes. It was not like the town she had heard of. It was not like the cabin she had left. It was something else, something deeper. The tribe began to ride again, down into the valley. As they passed, people turned to look. Some faces were curious, others cautious. A few older women spoke quickly to each other, eyes fixed on Eliza. She held her breath, feeling their stares. But Mira tightened her arms around her and said softly, "No fear. With me." And for the first time that day, Eliza believed her. The sun dipped low as the tribe gathered. They formed a large circle in the center of the valley, just beyond the river. Men, women, children, all stood side by side, their faces serious, their eyes fixed on Eliza. Some whispered. Others stood in silence. But all watched. Eliza stood beside Mira, the sacred pendant still warm against her chest. Her heart beat hard in her ribs. She had never stood before so many people. She had never felt so small. Torin stepped forward. He raised one hand, and the crowd grew still. He began to speak in his own language, strong and measured words. Eliza did not understand them, but she could feel the weight they carried. He pointed to Mira, then to Eliza, then to the pendant. As he spoke, Mira took a shaky step forward. She leaned on a walking stick, her bandaged leg still weak. Her voice rang out clear and sharp. She pointed to the sky, to the fire, to the place on the ground where Eliza had helped her lie down. She told her story. Even without knowing the words, Eliza could feel the truth in them. Myra's voice trembled with feeling, not fear, but passion. She touched her chest, then Eliza's, and spoke the word sister again and again. Still, not everyone seemed sure. One man shook his head. A woman near him crossed her arms. A few older voices rose, not in anger, but in worry. Their eyes looked past Mira to Eliza. A white child, a stranger. Eliza's hands curled into fists. She wanted to speak, to explain, to show her heart, but she had no words they could understand. She could only stand there, quiet and still, hoping someone would see her as Mira did. Then, from the edge of the circle, a small figure moved. A boy, no more than 6 years old, stepped forward. His hair was messy, and he held something small in his hand, a wildflower, yellow and trembling in the wind. He walked slowly to Eliza and looked up at her with soft, serious eyes. Then he held out the flower. Eliza knelt and took it gently. The boy spoke in his language, just a few words. The crowd fell silent. Torin's voice was low as he translated. He says, "She has the same sad eyes as me. Sad children should not be alone." A hush passed through the people. Then, one of the elders stepped forward. She was an old woman, her silver hair tied in braids, her face lined with seasons of life. She studied Eliza long and slow. Finally, she reached out and touched the pendant on Eliza's chest. When she spoke, her voice was deep and calm. Torin turned to Eliza, his eyes shining. She says, "The spirits sent you, because we needed to save you too." And just like that, the circle broke into smiles, nods, and quiet voices of welcome. Eliza was no longer a stranger. She was one of them. The sun had disappeared behind the hills. 1,000 stars now blinked above the valley, lighting the sky with quiet beauty. Fires burned gently outside each shelter, their smoke curling upward into the night. Eliza sat beside Mira near one of those fires, wrapped in a thick blanket that smelled of cedar and smoke. Myra's head rested lightly against her shoulder, and the wildflower the little boy had given her was tucked behind her ear. All around them, people moved with soft steps and kind smiles. A woman handed Eliza a bowl of warm stew. A group of children invited her to sit with them later, pointing and laughing gently in welcome. Even the warriors who had once looked at her with suspicion now nodded when they passed. Torin stood nearby, speaking with the elders. He looked toward Eliza from time to time, and though his face was quiet, his eyes held pride. The old woman who had spoken last, the one with the silver hair and strong voice, had touched Eliza's heart with only a few words. Child of the spirits, she had called her. Not orphan, not outsider, child of the spirits. Eliza looked down at the pendant resting against her chest. It no longer felt strange or new. It felt right, like it had always belonged to her. Mira stirred beside her and took her hand. She smiled, tired but peaceful. "Sister," she said softly. Eliza squeezed her hand. "Sister," she repeated. For so long, she had felt alone, in the woods, in the cabin, even in her own heart. But now, that emptiness had softened. She did not know all the names. She did not speak their language. But she knew she was wanted here, and she knew she would learn. That night, as the fire crackled low and the songs of the valley filled the air like a lullaby, Eliza leaned back and looked up at the stars. They reminded her of her grandmother, the woman who had taught her how to be brave, how to be kind, how to listen to the quiet things. She closed her eyes and whispered into the sky, "Thank you, Grandma. I am home." Beside her, Mira held her hand a little tighter. Neither girl spoke again that night. They did not need to. The fire, the stars, the circle of new faces, it was enough. Two girls who had once been lost had found something greater than shelter or safety. They had found a place to belong. And that was everything. Sometimes a single good deed is enough to bring two lost souls together. What do you think? Was it fate, courage, or something we can't see? Feel free to share it in the comments. If this story touched you, leave a like, share it with someone who needs comfort, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for stories that remind the heart what truly matters.